Welcome to The Line. Local media continues to report on a change in oversight for the UNM Health Sciences Center. The Albuquerque Journal reported this week that state officials approached the Health Sciences Center earlier this year and asked for $50 million in a loan to help pay for a larger Medicaid shortfall. That would be about $400 million plus in that shortfall, by the way. Officials from the Health Sciences Center declined to make that loan, in part because the state couldn't guarantee that it would be paid back. There have been accusations in recent weeks that UNM Regent's decision to change the governance of that Health Sciences Center was politically motivated. We discussed that decision here on The Line a few weeks ago. The Regents announced the proposed change on a Friday and voted on it on a Monday. Does this new information about the requested loan impact how the public views that decision? The Line panelists are ready to tell us what they think. I'm joined at the table tonight by former New Mexico House Minority Whip Daniel Foley, Merritt Allen from Vox Optima, Laura Sanchez-Rivey, she's an attorney at Cuddy & McCarthy LLP, and former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman is with us. Now, Laura, some important questions unanswered about the potential influence of politics in this decision. We tried to unpack it a couple of weeks ago. We didn't have all the information. Certainly, we don't have it today, but we have a lot more than we had a couple of weeks ago. Right. Your gut sense of where politics is being played here, because we're talking about appointments of regents, right, regents having connections to certain political parties, and on it goes. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's surprised that there's political connections here. I'm certainly not surprised. I think all the regents at some point or another have had political ties, depending on who the governor is. I mean, that's kind of how you get those positions. I think what's troubling for me is there's new information about this request that HSD, the Human Services Department, had of the Health Sciences Center of $50 million to bail out on Medicaid. Now, according to Dr. Roth, basically, this was not the first time that they had asked that or even done such a loan. They did one of $5.8 million in 2015. I think the issue with this one, from what I read, is that there was no guarantee about when they would be paid back. And I think any business person would find that troubling. $50 million without a guarantee of when the repayments would be made is a problem. I think for me, what's further troubling is that there's a deputy director, one of two deputy secretaries at Human Services Department, who is Mike Nelson, who's married to Marin Lee, who's a regent on, Board of Regents, and she, along with Rob Doty, president of the Regents, were the two that pushed for this change in the leadership at HSC. So that, to me, is, I mean, that's a very strange connection. And one that I think is troubling if people knew that there was that kind of close connection there. After having just received, essentially a rejection of a $50 million bailout, and then all of a sudden, somebody who's married to the HSD secretary, deputy secretary, is voting to try to completely change, and she's one of a few votes, and now is one of the three people that are on the governing board.
In your opinion, should they have recused themselves from that vote?
I think that there should have been, at the very least, there should have been some, disclosure.
Gotcha.
And that's one of the things is, as somebody who's in a public position, you have to either recuse yourself or at least disclose to people so they understand, what those kinds of connections look like.
That makes sense. Senator, you agree with that? Was there something in this process that could have been better handled?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The transparency, the disclosure, technically, I suppose it was legal, but it certainly smells, particularly when you see the proximity in time to when that request for $50 million was turned down, and the very next week, or maybe it was even the next day, then there was this move on the part of the regents to essentially take over the Health Sciences Center. Now, I think there are other internal UNM politics involved as well. And I think UNM is facing a shortfall, and they are eyeing the reserves of the Health Sciences Center that wanted to use it for a new hospital, and saying, well, do we need that new hospital, which is what that community board had been pushing for, and couldn't we better use it to solve our problems on the main campus?
Right. Merritt, interestingly, the senator brought up the timeline as well. It's been revealed, Joey Peters did some great stuff for New Mexico Political Report on this, that in fact, some of the regents weren't told that this was in the planning. These things were going on behind the scenes in that small group that Laura Sanchez-Rivey just described. And their excuse was, it's about a rolling quorum. Once again, the rolling quorum. is the answer. Meaning we can't get everybody in the room. Just a few people are going to make this decision, and everybody else is going to have to deal with it.
Not only in the room, Gene. It's you can't call. So like if we were the Board of Regents, I can't call Laura and then call Merritt and then call Dee Dee, and then we have this conversation all through me. That would be considered a rolling quorum.
That's right. That's right.
We also can't do a group email to have a discussion on that. Well, you know, politics aside, one of the dissenting regions who did not vote for the change, I'm paraphrasing his statement, but along the lines of, you know, we're fixing a problem that doesn't exist. And so that's, you know, I'm really scratching my head on this, because we've got a very basic reality where our governor made a decision to continue Medicaid expansion. This has been an issue for over a decade, that we're going to have to pay for this at some point. We knew this was coming. We knew this was coming a decade ago.
That's right.
The bottom has fallen out of our budget. There are some much more unpleasant options available. You know, one thing that did not come up at this legislative session was the notion of an assessment. You are allowed, state legislatures are allowed to approve up to 60% assessment on all patient receipts to cover the cost and help offset the cost of Medicaid expansion and these not over-enrollment, but higher than expected enrollments that are plaguing a number of states. If that happened, instead of a one-time request, it would be an annual 6%, and looking at UNM Health Center's budgeted of $1.148 billion in patient fees. That's what they're budgeting this year to get in patient fees. They'd be looking at $68 million.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the difficulty, though. Yeah, go ahead.
That requires a vote by the legislature. This was an administrative move. So, I mean, I think they were looking for some quick cash rather than going through the process of, those fees, which would be very controversial, I think.
Well, they could also lower Medicaid reimbursements.
Let me ask you guys this, starting with Dan. We've got another wrinkle that came out this week. Joey Peters again on the 30th is reporting headline UNM Regents political ties questioned after AHSC overhaul, meaning it turns out that Mr. Doty's law firm is actually working and doing business for a PAC, Republican PAC, that's been involved with all kinds of things here. Does that give you pause that this connection, does that feel a little too close to you and your gut? Is that a problem for you, having somebody working with a Republican PAC in this office, in this law firm, who is also a regent at UNM, who is also involved in this decision for HSC? Is that okay for you? Does that work?
It's the way it is.
I got to stop you right there. And that's okay? That's the way it is?
But Gene, this is back to the conversations we've had many times at this table about we're going to find these nonpartisan commissions to do this.
Right.
People who aren't paying attention to politics don't care to get involved in these kinds of things.
Right.
So when you go out to get the Board of Regents, the University of New Mexico and New Mexico State University Board of Regents positions are the most coveted positions you could get when you get appointed to a position by the governor, other than a secretary.
I realize that, but just in the interest of time, let me just ask you, stay on the original question. We have a regent who is involved
this is not
with
the
a
first
PAC,
time.
a political PAC.
This is every region everywhere, Gene. You're acting like it's a shock that regions who are
not every
involved in
region is involved with a PAC.
Gene,
if that's what you're trying to say.
Gene, I'm telling you that the Democrat chairman of the Democrat Party was appointed to the Board of Regents at the University of New Mexico.
Okay, gotcha. So let's stay on the HSC thing. How does it impact, in your mind, this decision between HSD and HSC? Does it impact it at all?
No, I don't think it impacts the decision at all. I think to say that somebody's on the Board of Regents, they got appointed by a governor, whether it's Bill Richardson, doesn't matter who, or Susana Martinez, that you're not going to have communication with the governor's office is ludicrous. They're going to have communication from the governor's office. I think at the end of the day, you have a major policy decision that was made in the prior administration, and that was take the largest amount of revenue from the state, from the University of New Mexico, which is Health Services, create this whole new board and take it out of the deal.
That's great, but that's the last administration. I'm talking about this administration.
But that last administration made a decision, Gene, that last administration made a decision that ties the hands of the current administration.
That works out. Laura, let me ask you about this. We have somebody running a PAC, not running, but involved with the PAC. His law partner is the one very closely running.
Well, I mean, I would argue he's running.
I would argue he's running it too.
Well, and the reason I say that is because anybody who's ever been involved in a PAC, I mean, the treasurer is the person who essentially signs off on stuff, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's who they are. I've been a treasurer before for various things. I have certain standards about what I need to see before I sign off on stuff. Not everybody has that. Sometimes
Sure.
it's just a name.
That's right.
But the fact that it's housed at, like the address is at his office,
Right.
and then one of his associates, I'm an associate at a firm, I know how much influence there is, from partners on associates. I mean, it essentially is his office.
Right.
So there's very strong political ties. I think, a lot of regions have had political ties. That part is not, to me, a surprise. What is that the fact that he was connected to a PAC that closely was not disclosed when he went through the Senate confirmation process.
Right.
That's the part I have a problem with, and that's what a lot of senators, I think, have heartburn over.
Right. I would if I was still on the Rules Committee, and I was on the Rules Committee for 12 years, confirming these appointments. And it was acknowledged that these were governor's political appointments. But what was unusual in this case is the involvement with a PAC. Right. And, in the past 10, 12 years, the importance of these independent PACs has grown tremendously, and they're more important than the actual membership in a political party. Right. This was not disclosed, so I do find that troubling.
I mean, I think the issue comes down to disclosure. I've been through the Senate confirmation process when I got appointed as to the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority Board. I got appointed by Richardson. The issue that Dan brings up about, of course, there's going to be communication. Sure. I think it varies depending on what agency or board you're on. I mean, obviously on the regions, I'm sure that they keep them on either side of the political spectrum. They keep their the governor informed. When I was on RETA, I didn't hear one way or the other, and I straddled both administrations. Right. So I was there when Richardson was there, I was there after Martinez got in. Nobody ever contacted me and said, here's how you need to vote. Wow. So I think it depends. There's different interest level on different issues depending on what the board is.
That's right. Merritt, the disclosure issue, do you have a problem with that as well? I mean, Senator Michael Sanchez has a problem with it.
Of course he does.
He has a big problem with it, and maybe he should. He looked the guy.
It's not the rules.
Hold on, Merritt.
It's not the rules.
But he was quoted saying he looked the man in the eye and asked him if this was going to be in PAC.
Oh, he asked him if he was going to be in a PAC?
No, he didn't.
Oh, okay. So I mean, that's the key, Gene. The key is that advising consent doesn't mean
so if you don't
elections
ask the specific question,
elections
then
have consequences. This is another example that elections have consequences. The governor gets to appoint the people.
Nobody's arguing that.
The rule says here's the qualifications to be on the Board of Regents. That's it. It's not I don't like you. I'm not for you. I don't like your political stance.
There's a form.
The question is, would we have even known about this and the process in replacing the HSC board? Would we have even known about this 4 or 8 years ago? Would we have been able to access it?
Interesting
question. So, I think we're just struggling as a state, taking what's been kind of small town backdoor deals way of doing government, which works in many ways, but trying to bring that into this open government transparency. Our systems are not consistent with our transparency.
But there is a point, though, Merritt, and we're going to wrap this up here in a quick second, about disclosure in self-disclosing. You know what I mean? I think that's what's giving a lot of people pause here.
I mean, in the whole, I've seen in terms of people who have been appointed by governors, regardless of what side of the aisle, I can only think of 2 people who have not been approved. And one was Nettie Holguin, who had very significant political ties that she disclosed, and they dinged her for it.
That's right.
And what was Matt Chandler.
Right.
I mean, those are the only 2 in recent memory. There may have been one other under Richardson. But for the most part, they typically get appointed, but they also have to disclose all of that. And one of the issues with Doty's law firm, I mean, not only is he related to this PAC, but he also has a contract with GSD, General Services Department and Risk Management, and he also did a lot of work for Diana Duran's office. And we've all seen, Diana Duran's issues, and now she's out of office. But he was very heavily involved in that. So in terms of the work that his firm had been doing, what he had been doing, I'm not sure that was fully disclosed, and I think that's what people are having problems with.
Interesting point. In a few minutes, we will debate the announcement that Innovate ABQ is entering the first building phase near downtown Albuquerque.